welcome ACE attendees to the Be a Superhero presentation, where we will talk about effective executive speech writing. Thanks for watching, and we hope you'll emerge from this better prepared to help your executive deliver at the podium. There are two of us presenting today. I'm Chris Moran. I am a speechwriter at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. I work for the senior vice president there. And then next month, I will be working for Scott Angle, who is coming to lead our institution from NIFA. And Faith, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, Chris, thank you. I am Faith Peppers, and I am the Director of Communication for USDA NIFA. Formerly, I spent 27 years with the University of Georgia College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences as Director of Public Affairs and leader of the news team there.
Okay, well, I wanted to start with a little bit with why we give speeches. With all this modern communications technology we have, why do we still gather in one place to hear someone speak? And I wanted to share what's really considered one of the masterpieces that I thought would be especially poignant right now, given what's going on across our nation. I'll just set the stage a little bit. Robert Kennedy was campaigning in 1968. He was in Indiana at the time when he found out that Dr. King had been assassinated. He was in a heavily African-American neighborhood. And the thing was, many of the folks in his audience here had not heard about this until he announced it at his speech. So bear with me here. I just want to share this great speech with you.
We have erected up the envelope that can be handled.
Very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. And he once wrote, Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And what dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
Wow, so speeches matter. The Indianapolis remained calm that night when hundreds of other American cities did not. RFK's words certainly contributed to that. You could hear him win over the crowd as he progressed through the speech, and it's just reminds me every time I see it of the impact you can make with your words. The power of speech is that we can give to our principles is to set the right tone, to find the right words, and increase our value to our bosses. So I'd like to go into to have Faith take over now for a bit.
Thank you, Chris. We can choose the right words, and we can help our leaders be very effective speakers. The most important thing we have to do is help them understand the audience. And in order to write a good speech, we have to know the audience. We have to know who's listening and what are their motivations, what do they care about, what are the types of things that they want to hear. Oftentimes we find that we tell the audience what we want to tell them without really listening to what it is they want to know. And what they want to know is far more important than just what we want to tell them. Next slide, Chris. So in order to write an effective speech, you have to find that sweet spot, that area of relevance between the information that you want to share with the audience and what the audience wants to hear from you. Next slide. And little things matter. There are things that can go on within a speech or within the speaker that can impact the way the audience receives that information. And one of the things that we do at the University of Georgia is pay close attention to those tiny little details that will connect the speaker to that audience. The last thing you want is for your speaker to show up at a Cotton Commission meeting wearing a peanut tie. So pay attention to those little things because that's important to your audience. It can distract your audience and create a barrier between what you're trying to say and how that audience receives that information.
So before your speech, you do need to what we call scout it out. Lincoln said that he spent about 2/3 of his time thinking about what his audience wanted to hear and about 1/3 of his time thinking about what he wanted to say, which dovetails on what Faith was just saying about that intersection of what you want to say versus what they want to hear, and also points out the importance of advanced work. So to prepare for a speech, you want to do some of the basics. Where's your speaker fit into the agenda? Avoid him or her saying the same thing that the preceding speaker is going to say. In fact, I had an episode early in my tenure as a speechwriter for Dr. Jack Payne where he found out someone was going to be saying much the same thing as him, and we kind of arranged to have Jack go first so that he got to deliver the original content. You want to know how much time your speaker has. You need to respect the event organizers. As great as we think our bosses are, there's limited time in a given event for people to be speaking, and it's professional courtesy to try to stay within those bounds. You want to know a little bit about how the room will be set up. Obviously, whether there's a microphone, is the lectern lit, that kind of thing. And will there be Q&A? Should your speaker be prepared to think on his or her feet? You want to know the size of the room. Who are the VIPs in the room? Who needs to get a shout out from the lectern? So conference organizers, for example, are going to be your best friends on this front. They'll have attendance lists. They'll know what's going on. They'll know who's on the agenda. If it's an annual event, you can look at past agendas to see what's been talked about, what's important to this audience. If you have an agenda for the day's event, you can offer a teaser of what's coming up. And then Faith, why don't you talk a little bit about a particular kind of audience?
So often we think of the audience as all the people in a room when you're speaking. And all the people in a room when you're speaking are important, but sometimes you're speaking to an audience of one. There's one particular person, one important official, one media person who you want to make sure you are directing your comments to, and that they are getting the point of your message. So think carefully, who is that one person you're speaking to? Another way you can use the technique of an audience of one is if you're speaking to an entire group and there's someone within that group who is the typical audience member, and you know that person, think about how you would focus one-on-one comments with that person. How would you talk to them? What tone would you use? And that can help you set the tone for the entire speech.
I wanted to share an example of a case where I was writing for an audience of one. My boss was giving a speech at a donor event, a lot of supporters. There was one particularly prominent donor in the room. Because I had met him and interviewed him and learned about his life, I knew that he had graduated from the university in the 1950s. And I also knew, because he shared with me during the interview, that he still remembered his student ID number from something like 1959. Well, I wrote into my speech, into my boss's speech, he stopped the speech and asked the donor in front of everyone, what was your student ID number in 1959? And the donor was able to respond. I knew he would know the answer on his feet. And it created a really very strong moment of connection, I think, between my boss and the donor. But again, that takes advanced work. You would never want to do that if you don't know if the person knows the answer to the question. So there are some pitfalls you want to avoid, especially the third one on here. We've all been there, you know, when we're listening to a speaker at 11:45, everyone just wants to eat lunch. So that's pretty much the slot I try to avoid the most if I have a choice in slotting my boss for a speech. The best is to kick things off. Everybody's fresh, their attention span is higher. If you do have to do it after lunch, you want to probably make your speech a bit more lighthearted, less focused on gravitas, because this audience may have been listening to presentations all day, and they're just not going to have the attention that they did in the morning. So a few things about the words you use. When you're doing your last edit, replace I with you or we as often as you can, because it's not about the speaker, it's about the bond that he or she shares with the audience. If you can do so, I don't remember who said this, but they said you can never flatter your audience enough. Cast your audience in heroic terms. What they do is important, is a message you want to consistently transmit to your audiences. So keep in mind there's something called a hierarchy of communication, where you inform, you create understanding, you reinforce shared values, change attitudes, elicit action. And you could see, I mean, I can send that hierarchy to anyone who's interested you'll see my contact at the end. But I thought RFK's speech was brilliant in walking people through that hierarchy of needs they had. First, he informed them. He created context around the events. He reinforced the shared values and shared sense of loss, since he had lost his brother to violence. He wanted to change attitudes by appealing to love instead of hatred. And he elicited action at the end, just go home and say a prayer. And by and large, it appeared that he got his audience to do that. So let's see. Faith, why don't you talk a little bit about repetition, because I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
It certainly can be, Chris. Repetition, you will recognize as a technique that often helps with the flow of a speech, but it also creates a dynamic image with the audience and what they hear. I think probably the single best example in the world is the I Have a Dream speech from Reverend Martin Luther King. It's certainly a speech that has endured the test of time. It is a message that when someone says, I have a dream, you immediately know who said that, where they said it, what the circumstances were. Another good example is Churchill's comments during World War II, where he continues to say, we will fight them. And so it can create this strong sense of flow and continuity, and it immediately sets the tone for the speech. You know exactly where they're going and what that call to action is going to be at the end of the speech. So it is a good tool. One of the things that kind of has grown out of that is a sense of repeating the exact same message, not just within a speech, like I have a dream, but to use the same phrases over and over and over in speeches. Right now, in the midst of the political campaign season, we will hear this frequently from those who are campaigning for office as they try to drive home what their point is. And it can work in politics, but you need to be very careful when you are doing this with your experts and with your administrators. We certainly want some phrases repeated because it's a brand message that we're trying to drive home with a lot of different audiences. What you need to think about is who in those audiences are overlapping. How many times have they heard this phrase? How many times have they heard this speech? And some recent research out of the University of Georgia's Terry College of Business found that this type of repetition, where different audiences that may have the same people hear the same phrasing over and over and over, creates a sense that your speaker is inauthentic and disingenuous in what they're saying. So you want to be very careful that you don't make people think this is a memorized speech that is not sincere. I encourage you to look up that study and take a look at it and form your speeches based on what you're learning there. It doesn't mean that you can't reinforce the same themes. You just want to be very careful about using the exact same verbiage, which is kind of counter to what we have thought in the past about how we really set our brand and our brand recognition through speeches. Chris?
Faith, is this one you or me?
Take it. So when you're preparing to deliver those speeches, there's a certain list of things that you want to make sure you do. Check yourself out, take a look in the mirror and see how things work, how your how everything about you looks. Is there anything that's going to be distracting? I will tell you, in this era of Zoom, I spent more time looking in the mirror to make sure I don't have weird hair flying up in the back. It's the same thing when you're speaking. You want to make sure that everything is set. Is there going to be video? Are they going to be live streaming your speech? Those are things you need to remember, because video cameras can do odd things with patterns. So make sure that you don't have on checks or tweed, anything that is going to make a video camera dance. It's also equally difficult for cameras to cue in on white, especially if you have on a white shirt under bright lights on a stage. So think about those things. If you know that there's going to be a live streaming video, or if it's going to be recorded so people can watch it later, it may mean that you need to have a change of wardrobe. But you also want to practice out loud. Sometimes words look great written in sequence on paper, but when you try to say them out loud, they can become a tongue twister. And some words are difficult for different people to say. We all have those stories where we make fun of the way our kids said certain words when they were younger, and you certainly don't want that to happen on a stage. So practice out loud, see how easy it is for those words to roll off the tongue of the speaker. Don't let the introduction outdo the speech. I know people often like to give these grand introductions of their speaker, but really the shorter the better. You don't want your audience to be tired of your speaker before the speaker ever gets to the podium. But you also don't want the lead up to be so grandiose that the speaker falls flat behind such a grand introduction. So given the opportunity, make sure that you write the introduction for your speaker. It will also lend itself to you being able to offer a lead-in to what the speech is going to be about, an easy connection for your speaker to the introduction that was given of them. So see if you can volunteer to write the introduction so you can keep it short, sweet, to the point, and a good lead-in to what's coming next in the speech. And the really the best thing that you can do for a speaker that you're working with is offer them honest critique. If they are practicing and something doesn't sound right or it doesn't flow right, make sure you tell them. And also offer that critique after the speech, especially if it's a message that they're going to be delivering to several different audiences. The only way they can do a better job in front of the next audience is if you are truly honest with them about how they performed in that past. Chris?
Yeah, I just want to echo, especially the thing Faith said about writing the intro. Keep it short, not grandiose, but it is important that the introduction sort of establish your speaker's credibility. So he or she doesn't have to spend time doing that in the introduction to their own speech. One little tip as far as the comparison between written on the page versus delivered orally, I have found, believe it or not, the read aloud function in Microsoft Word to be fairly useful. I will put the speech up, hit read aloud, and turn my back on the screen because you just hear things, even from a computerized voice, that you may not have seen on the page. So I'd recommend doing that. It does not substitute for your principal rehearsing out loud, but sometimes it's the best you can do. So actually, I wanted to, I'm sorry, I advanced too far. On the day of, couple of things. Check the dais. I actually had to find a crew to install a microphone once. Our president's speechwriter brings a lectern lamp with him for cases where there's not good lighting and you can't see the printed speech. Make sure you bring a copy of the speech just in case your speaker forgets. Check for ambient noise. Sometimes if your campus is undergoing construction like University of Florida has been, there can be loud noise. You want to make sure then the windows are shut, or sometimes you can even go out to the crew and say, can you keep it quiet for 10 minutes? And I try to monitor the door too, so it doesn't open and shut and slam during the speaker's words. Faith, why don't you tell them about kind of what you do after the speech is over?
So sometimes what you're going to do in follow-up has to be set into motion ahead of time. So one of the things I like to do is to message test, especially if we're starting a new vision campaign, if there's something that we're trying to add to our brand message. I will set up people in the audience, someone from the industry, an alumni, an ag communicator from one of our commodity commissions, and I will tell them ahead of time, we're working on some new messaging here on this topic. I want you to listen carefully to the messages in the speech and let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and give me some follow-up afterwards. So I have key people who I have identified who are really paying very close attention to give me some information that I can use when I debrief the speaker afterwards. So it's a very helpful tool in being able to pivot if you need to. If you have a message that you think is really going to drive home the point and you hear from 2 out of 3 of your test audience that it really fell flat, you want to change that before they deliver that speech again. So having that message test built in allows you to be able to give some objective feedback to your speaker and also to make needed changes in advance of future speaking engagements where they're going to be talking on the same topic. And also, you need to pay attention. Speakers, just like there are certain people who have built-in phrases like or like that they say a lot, You will also find in some cases that speakers get into such a routine that they will use the same phrase over and over and over again, to the point that sometimes it can become a joke in the back of the room. So you want to make sure that you're listening for those things. Point it out to the speaker and say, this is the third speech in a row where you use this phrase. We need to find another way for you to make that point, another way for you to say that, so that it doesn't become tired to your audience. So that kind of follow-up is really important. And it's also important that you repeat that debrief with the speaker before the next audience if they're speaking on that same topic, so we can remind them of what we learned from the last experience and how we're going to improve it for this next experience. Chris?
So I just want to share a few tricks of the trade that I've become familiar with over the last couple of years. One is, whenever possible, to personify your data. Anecdotes and real people illustrate much more powerfully than numbers in general. So if you really want to make impact on a point, really drill down to try to tell that point through an individual case, rather than just saying this has happened 6.2 million times. Another one is get to the point quickly. You don't want your audience ever thinking, where is this going? That's when they grab the smartphones and start paying attention to something else. Try reenacting your stories. Don't just tell it. Use quotes. Use short sentences. Have the people in your story actually speaking lines. Build a story bank. You never know when you're going to need a story. Your speaker should have 3 or 4 hip pocket stories to tell, because there will be occasions when they are, it's sort of spontaneous. They're invited to the left turn to say a few words. One thing I think helps audiences a lot is when a speaker uses contrast. It helps sharpen attention and understanding. So one great example is the first lines of A Tale of Two Cities. People are just attracted to things that stand out, and the way you make something stand out more is to set it against something that's very different from it. As far as messaging goes, the fewer messages, the better in your speech, but no more than 3. Just take a headline approach to developing these messages. You want it to be simple and memorable. I also recommend rounding out numbers. It's just easier to absorb that way. Do not use complex sentences and clauses, because while in writing you're trying to economize, and sometimes that entails parentheticals or clauses, whereas in speeches you need to lay it out in ways that's easier to hear, and sometimes that may even require more words. So just keep that in mind. The way people hear something is that they're processing differently than when they're reading something. Another thing I always try to do is ask them to frame things in positive terms rather than negative. Not just because you want to be uplifting, but positives are easier to remember than negatives. So you wouldn't say in a story, you wouldn't say in a speech necessarily, oh, I'll never forget. Instead, try using, I'll always remember. So I wanted to share one more video with you that kind of drives home, the passion I feel for speeches, and would love to discuss with any of you anytime what you're up to with your speech writing. Let me just cue this up. This is much shorter than the other video, but I think it eloquently states why we do this.
Despite all the developments in technology and mass communication, I am standing before you today, as I might have done 50,000 years ago, to give you a speech. Why do we still give speeches, and why do we still go to them?
Speeches matter because at the end of the day, we're humans.
Speeches exist for one thing, that is to inspire people to do something, believe something, take action at a particular moment in time.
Speeches are more than important, they're vital. I call it physical dialogue because when you speak to someone, in front of someone, without any screen, but just, naked as we are, then the best can come out of it.
Lucinda Holdforth says speeches aren't for what happens inside of us, but for what happens between us, between me and you, between you and one another.
We can solve problems, we can exchange strong ideas, we can have a true discussion, and I believe in that, especially in the world we are into that becomes more and more impersonal, more and more virtual.
We wouldn't be here if there weren't speeches that actually did make a difference. We're not just talking because we want to talk. We're talking to be heard, and we're talking, hopefully, because we want something to happen.
So what do speeches do? They allow leaders to offer their ideas through their humanity.
Being with your people live, it shows you're vulnerable, it shows you're open to dissent, and it shows that you deserve them to be following you.
We come together to breathe in tandem, to experience our own responses and feelings alongside each other.
When you think about the times in your life that you've changed your mind about something really fundamental, I don't know about you, but for me, it's because someone I trust is telling me an argument that I can understand.
We come together like this because to speak freely and to listen attentively is to be human, to express a core human capacity and a central democratic freedom.
So I would just like to leave you with a few resources. It's a super long link to the RFK speech if you want to see it again. The place I got it was the JFK Library. It's probably widely available through a Google search. I want to also recommend a website called ProRhetoric, which shares great speeches, tips and tricks, sort of the state of the art. And of course, you can contact me anytime. There's my email address and my cell phone number. And I don't know if Faith even has a new email address yet, with it being her first days on the job. But I'm going to sign off. Faith, do you want to say goodbye?
One final thing I would like to add is make sure that you're doing a good job networking with your ACE fellow ACE members and partners at other institutions. We have to remember that our experts and even our bosses move around the system quite frequently. My former dean is now my new boss at NIFA, but in a few short weeks, he will move to the University of Florida and become Chris's boss. So we've been able to share a lot of tips on, does he like just talking points or well-scripted speeches, how to rehearse. So use ACE as your strong network to be able to get tips, to be able to get advice from your fellow members, because you never know when you're going to be sharing an administrator, and all those tips that you've learned over the years will come in very, very handy. So thank you for your time and attention today. Please contact us if you have any questions or if there's any way we can help you become a better speechwriter.